to provide market intelligence to manufacturers and buyers to network and find new business opportunities. With worldwide reach, F2F is today the most effective platform for all textile and apparel business marketing needs. We have been with this industry through thick and thin in the last 20 years and believe that this period too shall pass. In our previous webinars, we have mentioned COVID-19 as a black swan event. And subsequent to the next webinar, we had analyzed how it had impacted the global supply chain and what could be the possible solutions to overcome such situations in future. Today, we have the third webinar in this series, which will be a discussion on what the future holds and how we need to work together to revamp this industry and the entire value chain. I'm happy to welcome and introduce our esteemed panel today for this discussion on the resurrection of the fashion industry post-COVID-19. Pleasure to have all of you live here with us today for this discussion. In no order, Dr. Rubana Haq, President, Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, BGMEA. Dr. Rubana Haq is the first elected female president of Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers Exporters Association and the managing director of Mohammadi Group. She has been in the industry for more than 22 years and has witnessed Bangladesh industry transform to become the second largest apparel exporter in the world. We also have Dr. A. Saktivel, Chairman, Apparel Export Promotion Council of India, AEPC. Dr. Saktivel has played a pivotal role in the development of Indian garment sector, especially SMEs. He has been actively involved in the Apparel Export Promotion Council, Tirupur Exporters Association, and Federation of Indian Exporters Organization for more than 30 years. He also has the prestigious Padma Shri Award conferred to him by the central government of India for his unparalleled service to the export sector. We have Mr. Stephen Lemar, President and CEO, American Apparel and Footwear Association, AFA. Mr. Stephen has more than 21 years of experience with the associations and has achieved dozens of wins on behalf of the membership, including measures to reduce or eliminate tariffs, support the US manufacturing, burdensome regulations, expanding the industry's corporate social responsibility, and protecting the intellectual property rights at home and abroad. We have Mr. Mathis Kriti, Secretary General, International Apparel Federation, IAF. Mr. Mathis has previously also worked with the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and as its Deputy Director, where he has built up the consultancy department and has heavily focused on compliance support, trade policy, sourcing, market information, and labor law. And finally, we have Ms. Hong An, the Acting General Secretary for Vietnam Textile and Apparel Association, VTAS. Ms. An is actively involved in the functioning of VTAS for supporting the Vietnamese manufacturer in the textile and garment sector. Thank you all for being a part of this discussion. Before I begin and bring on the questions to all of you, I would like to begin with a word that the BBC has termed coronavirus as an existential crisis for the fashion industry. Since humanitarian repercussions like losing jobs and financial hardships for people across the value chains, right from those who are harvesting fibers to make textiles, to the shop assistants who are selling finished fashion products, the impact on them is expected to outlast the pandemic itself. McKinsey has estimated that revenues for the global fashion industry, which includes the apparel and footwear sectors, will contract by 27 to 30% in 2020 year on year. And the most significant reason I believe for this decline is attributed to the nature of interconnectedness of the industry. As we all clearly saw that just when China was inching through recovery, outbreaks worsened in Europe and the US. Fashion industry is gloom-ridden, we all agree, by the coronavirus outbreak, and on every imaginable level. Production has ceased, retailers have closed, demand has plummeted, and so on. In the developing world, however, where healthcare systems are often inadequate and poverty is rife, we know the hardest hit will be the low-cost sourcing and fashion manufacturing hubs. On same lines, I would like to address my first question to Dr. Rubana Haq, that we know apparel industry is the backbone of Bangladesh's economy, and we all have come across the plight of Bangladeshi workers since the last 3-4 months, with order cancellations taking place, postponements of orders. Now, what is the current scenario in manufacturing countries like Bangladesh, Dr. Rubana Haq? And do you think this situation will stay the same for Asian sourcing countries?
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be in this webinar. I wish I could say that I knew what's going to happen tomorrow, but I don't. As far as the current reality is concerned, we are mostly running at a 55% capacity for most of our factories. Of course, export has dipped, and of course, sourcing has dipped. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's pretty much clear that at least for the next 6 months, we will not see any recovery. Yes, slow recovery is probably possible. The new order placements have begun, but unfortunately, they are at least 40% lower than what was initially expected and planned. So it is a difficult time for us. And going forward, we will have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, in between March and May, we literally have experienced a liability of almost $5 billion. And the hardest hit, of course, has been the industry, this industry. And quite rightfully, you have mentioned that it's the manufacturing nations of Asia which have suffered the most. At the same time, our workers have been hit very, very hard because the government did come up with a 2% service charge backed loan. But it's only for 3 months, and beyond that, we have no visibility. So it's going to be very difficult for us to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And we would, I think, it's probably the best to now plan out a regional approach so that all of us can strategize and see how we will, in the future, overcome this extreme vulnerability and extreme dependence on our demand side, and how do we protect ourselves and how do we protect our workers is very important. And a key discussion going forward would be actually on the post-COVID reconstruction of the industry. So basically, 3 things to be addressed. One is the wages of the workers, which needs to be absolutely ensured in the next 6 months. Number 2, the reconstruction of the industry, whereby we will have to retool ourselves and get ready for the next products, the next strategy, fast-tracking, business to business opportunities. And I'm taking advantage to address Stephen here and say that, American Apparel and Footwear Association could play a key role here in fast-tracking business, because we see a lot of opportunity with regard to export to America, and also by inviting American FDI in Bangladesh. So we could actually enter into very, very meaningful, focused discussion. And at the same time, we need to also remember that the small and the medium industries are actually all perishing. So how do we go forward? How do we collaborate and strategize and see the best way forward to address all these? This is going to be a key discussion for many of us. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Stephen, what do you think? Could AFA help manufacturing nations like India and Bangladesh and Cambodia and Vietnam to overcome such situations in future? Can we do something sort of a buyer-supplier coordination wherein we do not face such situations in the future?
Well, I think that's probably been at the heart of our supply chains for many years. And I think we have to remember that, COVID-19 was, I think you said it, a black swan event, was just something I think that nobody really foresaw and certainly didn't have the, nobody was planning for it. And it really had an effect on both on the supply side and the demand side. And I think as recovery happens, we're going to have to look at the demand recovery and the supply recovery to really get a sense of kind of what's going to be possible, or what sorts of things we should be planning for. If you look on the demand side, first of all, there's got to be demand. If you think about it, I mean, one of the big problems that we've experienced is as retail stores have had to close in the United States and Europe and many places throughout the world, that has meant that the companies at the front end of the supply chain, the retailers who are driving a lot of the decisions, they don't have the revenue to do that. And then of course that that lack of revenue then as it flows through the supply chain has had very, very debilitating effects throughout the supply chain, whether it's bankruptcies, layoffs, factory closures, all of the issues that we're all too familiar with. So as that recovery begins to happen, and as we can sustain it, A, how long will that take place? How fast will that occur? But B, what also will be the changes of that? Will we see more e-commerce, more direct to consumer? Will consumers be buying less? I mean, there's a lot of questions that we don't really know. And then on the supply side, and I think, this is really where your question is too, is, what kind of steps can we do to rebuild that, the trust and partnership along supply chains? That trust and that partnership has really taken a beating over the last couple of months. And what steps need to occur to make sure that folks can communicate, folks can work together with common expectations and assumptions. And as those expectations and assumptions change, how can they quickly move to that new world if we ever encounter something like this again? I'm hearing a lot of discussion about shorter, more regional, more vertical supply chains. And I think companies that want to be successful in this new normal, we keep hearing about the new normal, are going to have to be looking at how can they create and provide value in that role, whether you are on the retail side, the demand side, or the supplier side, the push side. I think there's going to be a lot of work towards that, rebuilding that cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I also believe that this is the largest crisis that the modern industry has ever faced. Fashion industry, which was generating about $2.5 trillion each year in terms of global annual revenues before the pandemic hit, is at a halt, or maybe it's just slowed down. But we do hope that the consumer's appetite for clothing will return when things start to normalize. On the same lines, my next question would be to Mr. Mathis. We know Europe was one of the first regions to be affected by the pandemic, primarily because of close cohesion between fashion industry stakeholders in Wuhan and Italy. And Italy, being the fashion capital of the world, needs to revive back. Can you comment on the situation in Europe, both on manufacturing side? We know a lot of Eastern European countries have come up smart into manufacturing apparels and giving competition to Asian countries. And we also want to have your comments on how is it like on the brands and retailers side.
Right. Okay. Looking at Europe and at the demand, what we are seeing is positive signs. So let us start with that. And what I think is important about that demand is that we saw that it's not only stores being closed, which is of course a very obvious way of blocking demand, but it has also been the reduction of the dressing occasions that is bringing down demands. So what you see is that in the country that I live in, actually a lot of fashion retail stores never were closed. There was never a complete lockdown. Mm-hmm. At the same time, sales dropped 80% sometimes in the stores that were not closed. And partly this is because people weren't leaving their house because they didn't want to, didn't dare to. But you can imagine if you're staying at home, you're not going to the office, you're not going out, you're not going on a holiday. That really reduces the size of the wardrobe that you need to get through the week. And so that is important to realize that it's not only looking at store openings, which are happening, which are driving up the demand. It's also looking at the resumption of regular life. And there's a bit of a problem there still, because a lot of offices are still closed. People are working from home. The people that are actually going to travel and go on a holiday, go to countries like Italy, where because they then have the time, spend a lot of their budget on clothing, are not going to do that. Not because it's not allowed, but because they choose not to do this. And that sort of is going to foreshadow the demand for quite a while, which is going to be less, even though the stores have opened, because of less occasions to wear clothing. So I think that's important to realize on the demand side. On the supply side, Eastern European countries were never as hard hit by COVID-19. Really pretty much under control. So as demand is picking up in the other parts of Europe, so the production there is picking up quite nicely.
So do you think there will be a competition to Asian sourcing countries like India, Bangladesh, Cambodia? Because a lot of time we are hearing about reshoring and onshoring. And we believe like for US, it will be Latin American countries from where they would want to source. Similarly, for Europe, it would be Turkey and Eastern European countries. Do you think, in the coming future, Eastern European countries would have that advantage over Asian countries?
Well, this has been going on for as long as I've been in the fashion industry, since 1996. So even though this COVID-19 crisis is really highlighting in an enormous way all kinds of trends, there are trends that were still already there. And the trend to bring production a little bit closer to home to cater to flexibility demand was already there, was already happening, but not in a very drastic way. And I don't see that happening even after this crisis in a very drastic way either. So the competition will be there, but it was already there.
Okay, all right. So that brings me to the next question to Dr. A. Saktivel. We know textile industry in India has been estimated at more than $100 billion in January 2020. It is the second largest employer, providing employment to 45 million people. We know we have a very, very strong backward linkage for fiber yarn fabrics. So India being one of those few countries who are well equipped with a strong backward linkage for textiles and apparel, how do you think the supply chain needs to be revisited to reduce the impact of pandemics like these on the overall apparel industry?
First of all, thank Fiber to Fashion to arranging this wonderful webinar. Thank you, Dipti. Yes, this pandemic situation has brought a lot of thinking to the exporters of India. So far, of course, India has got a very good raw material state, where next to China, I can say that we are the largest producer of cotton, we are the largest producer of the man-made fiber. This situation has made us to think. So far, we are concentrating more on cotton garments. We were not concentrating much on man-made fiber garments. And this situation has brought us to think. Last 2 months, we are working in our APC how to increase our export after this crisis. We find that our percentage of man-made fiber is only 20%, whereas 80% we do only cotton. So right. We are working on now man-made fiber garments. There we find that we need especially processing house to be strengthened for a nice fabric. And also we have to strengthen our sportswear and other active wears, so which we are not concentrating because so long so far. So we are planning to concentrate more on this garments and also the fabric. Definitely, after this crisis is over, India will be one of the largest producer of man-made fiber garments, which we are working on it.
Right. True. Okay, so Mr. Steve, another question to you. Even before the coronavirus disrupted financial markets or upended supply chains and crushed consumer demand across the global economy, fashion leaders were any which way not very optimistic about 2020, and the industry was already on high alert thanks to the US-China trade war. A lot of brands had already decided on or were in talks for diversifying their sourcing strategies. How critical and beneficial do you think is the redefining of the supply chain post-COVID crisis?
The supply chain is going through a lot of changes, and I think as Matthias mentioned, we've been going through a lot of these changes for a long time. But the changes that we're going through right now, we see really an acceleration of those trends that had been in place before. So as we're looking at diversification out of China, which was sort of the number one I think, dynamic that was affecting our supply chains in 2017 and 2018 and 2019. Certainly the ones we were looking at, we just see that accelerating, and that's accelerating as, you know, companies are not only factoring in the existing trade war. Remember, the existing trade war is still happening.
Right.
There are still tariffs on products that are produced in China that are shipped to the United States in our industry. But we are looking at possibly a renewed version of that trade war in some way, whether that is as a result of the rhetoric that we're seeing between the United States and China right now. We're in the middle of an election year, presidential election year, so that certainly inflames tensions. We are seeing a lot of concerns out of the Xinjiang province and the forced labor situation that is certainly not tolerated, but people are looking at as well. But then as you add to that COVID-19, one of the things that companies experienced is, as you were in China during the February-March timeframe, your product couldn't be shipped from China because of the factory closures. And then as you were looking at your supply chains outside of China, that started to hit you later February, March, and into April. Not only as the demand shock started to hit, but as you started to, as you couldn't get your replenishment of your materials that were coming in from China. So what that was demonstrating in a very real sense is that that the industry is very, very dependent on China as a source, as a supply chain source, not only for finished product. We've all been talking about diversifying, but also for your materials as well, whether it's, you know, yarns and fabrics or leather in, say, the footwear industry. And so one of the things that we've been hearing from a lot of members is the need not only to diversify their finished product, but to diversify their L2 and L3 suppliers as well. You know, there are obviously some countries where you have a lot more of that diversification that's occurred than others, but that's certainly something that folks are looking at. And then the other piece of that is, and this is the question that I think you just asked to Matthias about getting closer to home, as companies are looking at having these shorter supply chains so they can service, you know, just in time or e-commerce demands coming from consumers. Can they bring those supply chains closer? So will that create more nearshoring opportunities? I don't think we're going to see that dramatically increase, but I do think we're going to see a real opportunity for example, in the United States, countries in the Western Hemisphere to significantly increase their export operations. Again, a lot of things have to happen to make that work, but I think we could see that. And the final point, though, is even though we're going to see diversification out of China, that in no way suggests that China is not going to continue to be vastly important for the industry. There's still a lot of supply chains that are in China that will stay in China, if for no other reason than to service the growing Chinese market. You know, China for China is a very, very common refrain, and we will continue to hear that.
Right. Dr. Rubana, on the same lines, I would like to ask a question to you. We have heard that Bangladesh has a lot of dependency on China, both for raw materials as well as for machinery. So do you think, is Bangladesh looking at some other suppliers for raw materials and machineries, or it plans to continue its association with China?
Well, about China, I mean, we have a dependence on raw material, but only to a certain extent. For instance, for our knit fabric, we are literally almost 85% self-sufficient. So we don't need the huge dependence on China. On woven, we have almost 70%, 65%, not 70, but we have the self-sufficiency now. And the rest that we don't, 50% of it is coming from China. So basically around, I should say around 15% of woven fabric, we have the dependence on China. But what makes us a little weaker is our overdependence on cotton-based product and cotton. And we need man-made fiber-based textiles in Bangladesh. So for us, you know, going regional is a huge opportunity. I was just in discussion with Reliance's executive director just the other day, and he was talking about how they're doing a lot of fabric only for PPE. And currently there's a ban on export from India to outside. But, you know, if we could also tie up on that regional collaboration and get in the fabric quickly and turn it around here, then, you know, it would make sense. So we need to connect a few dots, beating the bureaucracy and beating different hiccups that we basically face in terms of policy making. So I think it's important for us to remember that, you know, with every disaster comes an opportunity. So I think it's worthwhile for us to also remember that for Bangladesh, you know, from United States, they just, you know, imported 52% less from China post-COVID, actually during COVID. And the dip from Bangladesh was only 2%. Right. Also, in value terms, we haven't really been that bad with US. So there is a great opportunity. And also in between January and April, we've had an increase of 1.9% in export to US. So I think there's a huge opportunity. We should absolutely strategically make full use of the US-China trade war and the 500 plus punitive tariff. I think it's worth really studying where we can improve. We have identified particular products where we can actually grow with US, and I'd be happy to share that with Stephen. At the same time, it's also important for us to have America shifting to Bangladesh. So we will be having deep engagement and deep interaction with the American Chamber of Commerce very soon. And we are hoping that, you know, they will all be a part of the conversation so that we can take it to another level, because we do also import a lot of American cotton. So there is a mutual beneficial relationship also between us, which can basically happen, and it should go. So Chinese dependency should decrease anyway, and I can say that candidly. But at the same time, it should be a balanced basket. So let's just hope that we continue strategizing and balancing so that we all benefit within the region. And I don't think it's going to be very selfish of me to say that, you know, inter-regional collaboration should be key for us.
Right.
And that's it.
All right. On the same lines, my next question to Mr. An from Vitas. We know Vietnam has traditionally focused on garment production with little capacity for fabrics manufacturing. And with supply chain disruption from China, what are Vietnam's plans to sustain its position as an apparel exporter? Miss Anne, can you hear me?
It's on mute.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak at this webinar. And I would like to share with you that facing with the unpredictable movement of the COVID-19 pandemic, the textile enterprise, especially the garment business of labor intensive, will face many difficulties due to the huge salary fund. In challenging with the COVID-19 pandemic, Vietnam textile and garment industry not only had to ensure their employment among their workers and sustainable development, but also have a proper and flexible strategy in the wake of new situation with the possibility to adjust supply chain. And you know that Vietnam enjoy already enjoy the advantage of its textile and garment industry only to just a new generation trade agreement as CPTPP and EVFTA. Therefore, it's a matter of certainty that the industry will rebound and break through the conflict with its supply chain and overcoming the challenge and boom to overcome now with the supply chain disruption from China. Vietnam government need to properly enable the realization of Vietnam textile garment industry development planning and paying particular attention to construction of textile industrial zone with a modern wastewater treatment and allow investment into the development of textile and dyeing and sewing and finishing chain, contributing to the global supply and reducing the dependence on importing, maximizing the preferential treatment from such trade agreement that we had negotiated as CPTPP or EVFTA. And what's more, the government should have channeled their investment in airports, waterway, and convenient logistic and transport system, which will attract investors to make up for shortage of textile and garment material. Province should be open to accept investors into textile and garment industrial park, clearing their current concern with reject industrial park in their province, obstructing Vietnam from utilizing advantage of trade agreement. And plus more, whether Vietnam textile and garment business can continue to overcome the COVID challenge, achievement, the next step is that not depend on not only the creativity and effort of the industry, but also we need the joint support and cooperation toward industry development among government, ministry, and local government. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right. And of course, this question would be addressed to each one of you, that I've been thinking that we have been talking about digitization for long, and fortunately or unfortunately, COVID has forced us to adopt digitization in both manufacturing and selling garments. Is the industry ready for this change? Are manufacturers willing to learn new technologies and the consumers eager to try out virtual online trial rooms? What are your views? We'll start with Mr. Stephen Lamar.
Yeah, you nailed it. Digitization is going to be a big part of our future going forward. I mean, you know, the customers are going to lead, and your competitors are going to push you into this if you don't want to go there. You know, the digital space is going to be so much more important. You know, COVID's taught us that technology was critical and crucial for communicating and managing your supply chains. And you know, as those supply chains become shorter, again, I keep talking about this, digitization is going to be really important on the back end to help make sure that shortness in time occurs. As you know, we're talking about shortness in distance, but also shortness in time. And e-commerce on the front end is going to be sort of the demand kind of counterpart to the digitization on the back end, and those two pieces are going to be increasingly married up. So yeah, fasten your seatbelts if you're not using technology actively and not exploring how to use technology actively in all parts of your supply chain, you're going to be left behind.
Right. Dr. Saktivel, do you think the manufacturing industry is ready to take that load of digitization? Because we believe when we're talking about automation, digitization, Industry 4.0, all of this, that the discussions have been going on for the last 2 to 3 years. Are the Asian countries ready for this change?
Yes, we have to, because of present situation. See, everything comes into a dream, or a dream comes true once we have been forced to do something. So now we have been forced to do this digitization, and we are preparing ourselves, because the garment industry is something that the whole world needs the clothing. It's not that after some time, really the clothing needs is really required. So we are now already started working in the APC, that digitalization, and also we are thinking about the virtual fair, virtual marketing. Everything is started in our council now. As Ms. Rumana said, that the cooperation between the region is more important. Definitely, we can replace China with the India can replace with the China, because India has got all this raw materials, whether the cotton, whether the man-made fiber, whether the fabric, whether anything, you can say that we are next to China on this. So the regional cooperation also will work well in this. And mostly this, again, when you want to do this kind of a virtual fair and virtual marketing, it is better that we all align together with the regional wise. Bangladesh ourselves can have one virtual fair in Dhaka, one virtual fair in Delhi, one virtual fair in New York. So combined strength of our region will definitely help this digitalization in the future.
All right. Mr. Mathis, what are your views on the same?
Well, I think digitization for the industry is as close as it gets to a one-stop solution. You know, it has so many advantages, and there's so many links between the supply and the demand. So actually designing something digitally, you can show it to a prospective customer, and this customer can say, yes, I like it, and then you can produce it. So that saves time, that saves resources. So I think it's very important. But underpinning the implementation of digitization is collaboration in the supply chain. You know, it's a supply chain game. It's not a single player that can install digitization and then it works. It has to be done between fabric suppliers, garment manufacturers, designers, brands. And that requires collaboration. And again, we started with this, that requires a certain trust and the ability for manufacturers to earn back the investments that they make. It requires training to work with these kind of things. And it's really the most successful examples are there when it's done holistically. You know, when it's not just a little segment of the supply chain interaction that is being digitized. It works best when it's done all the way across the board. And you have some fantastic examples of big companies that are implementing this, but also new, smaller companies that are sort of getting born digital and have the ability to do these things. So I'm positive about this. It's really what is already happening and needs to happen much quicker, but it needs to be underpinned, supported by real supply chain collaboration for it to work.
Right, indeed. I would agree that it needs to be imbibed in the entire supply chain for it to have its effect, or for digitization to be actually a success in the textile and apparel industry. Dr. Rubana, what would be your take on that?
A slightly different take on this, because we have 4.1 million workers here. So for me, I think, you know, virtuality is going to be a reality. It is already. Consumers are turning to more online shopping habits. All of us are shopping more online, of course. You know, sustainability has been such a catchy phrase, for a catchy word for a long time, but nobody really thought about, we all thought about digitization, we all thought about the environment, we all thought about the fourth industrial revolution, but none of us really thought that it would directly be about lives and livelihood. So I think we need to balance this. I mean, processes, strategies, B2C platforms, 3D sampling, everything and anything can happen. That's not an issue, and Bangladesh is getting geared up for that. I don't think there's an issue there, but we cannot also completely ignore that there are so many million people involved in ready-made garment manufacturing production. So where production comes in, we must be a little more mindful about the careful balance that we need to strike when we talk about automation and nearshoring, because there are lives which actually stand to get wiped out because of the over dependence on machines. So, you know, it should be complementary, and we must also remember tomorrow's consumer. The next generation takes shopping as an experience. So there's a lot of humanism that we need to also insert in the entire discourse. It just cannot be devoid of humanism. I mean, while they shop, they must have the entire story, the story of a worker, the story of lives and livelihoods in Asia must be told properly, must be conveyed, so that, the over dependence that we have on, conceptual over dependence that we have on complete automation is stopped right now, because COVID has been a great wake-up call for us. It's been a great equalizer. We are all waking up to our different realities with different realizations. So while we are doing all that, let's not just harp on what we said from 3 years ago, but let's change our strategies. Let's adapt a better and a more human strategy so that we don't lose out on jobs, so that we don't lose out on the appeal of the region, which hosts so many millions of workers. And so that, while we move on with automation and with everything, which is fine, that we also are mindful of what we ought to do and how do we position ourselves with the human story to every consumer out there.
Right. I think that makes sense, because we have to have the appropriate balance between humanitarianism and automation. How are we going to evolve both? Because if we see, a lot of Asian-based countries have heavy dependence of employees on the textile and apparel sector. And primarily, these sectors where there is less education and less training required for the execution of activities. So I think, yes, that makes sense. Another question, Dr. Robana, to you would be, the loss of business has exposed a rift between major brands and the factory owners in Bangladesh that we have been seeing for last 3 to 5 months. None can do without the other. And after the unsaid anti-China sentiment doing rounds, brands must shift to other Asian sourcing hubs. So how strong do you think that Bangladesh stands a chance? And what are the challenges for Bangladesh as a whole, as a manufacturing base?
You see, most of our brands, actually all our brands, have been strategic partners for us. We couldn't have grown the way we have without their support. Right. But it's also true that many brands have basically come up with a knee-jerk reaction to COVID. And when we woke up the following morning, around the 18th or the 19th of March, many of us got just, force majeure defenses and, lots of cancellations. But as an association, what we did was we went and we pleaded and we did whatever we could and told customers that please don't cancel, because we can't afford the cancellation. Mm-hmm. So we have been able to at least start the conversation on reversal or revision to that. But terms of payment terms have changed. We will be facing a lot of losses and everything. But at the end of the day, if we stay committed to the relationship, if there's constant dialogue, then it makes sense. And we must also figure out a way where we have meaningful bilateral discussions on how to engage when we go forward. Because most of us actually now trade against contracts, which make no sense. And we can't even afford to slap letters of credit requirements on every customer, because everybody needs to be flexible. But how do we face or handle or host that flexibility with sufficient caution is something that the brands also need to enter into discussions with us. At the same time, Bangladesh happens to be probably the single most, and I'll brag about it, single most safest supply chain at this point of time, because Accord and Alliance have worked with us for the last 7 years. And now we have an RMG Sustainability Council, RSC, in which manufacturers, brands, and trade unions are all in the same platform. So we have started operation from 1st of June. So I think it's a unique opportunity for us all to be on the same side. There should not be an us and you. Yes. And I think also it goes for the entire region. I mean, all our friend from India has been in touch with me almost every other week. The reason we've been talking to each other is just because we all have the same vision. We all have the same focus. So I think collaboration is the only way forward. We must rise above our petty differences and self-interest, and we must all engage together, brands or trade unions and us, or every every disaster requires us to come together. There is no alternative to collaboration. So I would like to just end on that note and urge all of us to basically make sure that we are all talking to each other and forming tighter groups and or rather creating a closer circle of trust.
Right. Dr. Saktivel, as per one of the statements in February that you gave, India was expected to be a preferred market for sourcing of apparel products from buyers from US, UK, and Europe. Of course, we did not know that the March lockdown will come and it will extend for 2-3 months. Do you think India still stands a good chance to replace China as a manufacturing base? And what are the challenges, as per you, which India needs to address first?
Yes, we have a fair chances. I am very confident that India will definitely have a brighter chances now after the post-COVID. There are things we have talked about, anti-segment against China. That also will help us in Europe and USA. Right. I can say that openly. Other thing now, as I said earlier also, we have all the strength for manufacturing of apparels. We are only lacking in the economic of scale and a little bit of, as I said, that bad fiber garments we never ever tried so far. Only we are catering only for the summer. I can say that boldly that again for Europe and States we are catering only for summer. Now we have to think about catering around the year. Around the year business you want to go, then you have to go for a man-made fiber. Whether it's the active wear or a sports wear or anywhere now other than the cotton, we have to go in for that. And we have a strength. And already see that whatever the cases come, we make it as an opportunity. Thanks to our Honorable Minister of Textile, Smriti Irani, when this crisis happened, we are zero in PPE kits. Right. But within 2 months, with their she really worked hard with our respected secretary also. Both of them worked hard. Now we are producing more than 8 lakh pieces per day. So we are self-sufficient in India. Now very soon that government is going to lift the ban for PPE kits. And 15 bags, they have lifted the ban for mask. Now the mask export is already happening. Now with the PPE kits happening, and I believe that this medical textile and PPE kits and face mask will be there around the year in the future. And more than 400 manufacturers got tested their fabric and the garments. They're ready for the export. So we always think that India has got all the strength to utilize the crisis into the opportunity. We will definitely overbeat or take China on this apparel. That I'm very confident about it. And as Ms. Rubla said, now regional cooperation is a must. Last 2 months, thanks to Ms. Rubla, we were talking on WhatsApp or sometimes on the phone also. So even now, we are going to have, India is going to be the member of STAR, which is why that this is organizing it. I have already having a correspondence with them. So we'll be a part of STAR also. So the regional cooperation also will play a vital role in marketing in Europe as well as the States and all over the other places.
Right. All right. And we know COVID-19 has put the apparel, footwear, textile industry sustainability transformations on pause as businesses are reeling in response to the pandemic. Liquidity and cash preservations are not top priorities among all fashion companies, even the financially strong ones. And current response measures are including cost cutting, staff furloughs, working capital optimization, and so on. To navigate the current crisis and the position for business advantage in a transformed industry, we need strong driving forces. Steve, this question would be to you. What, as per you, should be the driving forces for the apparel industry in the next 5 to 10 years?
And thank you for that question. And I would say there's probably a couple of things. And sustainability for sure is going to be a top driver. And this gets into that element of what was the trend happening that's being accelerated after COVID-19. You know, I think it's no longer going to be a question about whether your marketing is authentic. but about whether sustainability is in your DNA. And your DNA means the DNA of your supply chain. This gets back to the conversation that we had earlier about trust and partnership. And Dr. Rubana was talking about collaboration, and that's exactly right. Is that in order for that to work, your partners have to be part of that conversation. They have to agree with you. They have to be totally aligned with you. And sustainability is not just about production, but it's about people. It's making sure that that sustainability extends to the sustainability of your workforce, whether it's diversified, whether they're empowered, all the things that go into a fully viable and functioning workforce, a healthy workforce. That's going to be part of the equation too. You can't address part of the sustainability equation without addressing all of it. It's really a complete package. So absolutely, sustainability will be a key part of the equation going forward. And you have to remember that today's consumers are increasingly demanding that. So even if you kind of look at that and say, well, maybe that's just something that we want to do because that'll make us feel better. Maybe that's where we were a couple of years ago, but that's not where we're going to be now, because consumers need it, the planet needs it, and so it will be job number one for the industry. And I think the other driver is going to be technology. And we talked a lot about the various technologies that are going to be part of our supply chains, part of our retail environment. And you're right, there needs to be a balance, because at the end of the day, we're also talking about jobs too. But those jobs, I think, will be empowered by those technologies, not necessarily replaced by those technologies. So I think if we look at technology as enabling jobs, not replacing jobs, I think it'll be a stronger, more sustainable conversation going forward.
Right. Ms. Anne, my similar question would be to you from the manufacturer side. Do we see Asian manufacturers now need to compete more on sustainability than on cost?
I think that the sustainability and efficiency manufacturing can go along. I think that the current crisis has revealed that there is a need for more sustainable business model. Sustainability should be the core of every business strategy that day. Sustainability is an investment in the viability and the future of the company, the industry, and the country as Asia as a whole. Manufacturer can try for competitiveness, not only the lower cost of production, but also adopt environmental and social sustainability strategy. And producer compete on 4 core factors: cost, values, markets, focus, and sustainability need to transform from a low price producing industry to production on more value-added items. To invest into R&D and improve the industry, improve the innovative capacity of the industry. And sustainability will be the key requirement to work directly with global brands. And in Asia, we had Vietnam already cooperate with the fabric, promoting sustainability in textile and garment industry in Asia, fabric. And this is the opportunity for all with 6 countries, including China, Vietnam, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Cambodia. And fabric is among the initiatives to promote sustainable textile and garment industry, and also in response with the climate change. And with us can play the key role in increasing awareness of transforming business model to more sustainable approach. Also facilitate the more cooperation and collaboration with all stakeholders, including government, association, buyer, and other in Asia. Thank you.
Right. And we know COVID-19 has exposed a fundamental weakness in the traditional fashion system, matching supply and demand. Industry leaders have long known that old way of doing things, that is seasonally manufacturing items like Mr. Saktivel rightly mentioned, brought without any advanced customer feedback, and then months later hoping that these items will sell in retail stores around the world does not really work. Industry overproduction runs at incredible 30 to 40% each season. And for a business with $2.5 trillion in global annual revenues, fashion is ripe for an overhaul on how it produces and in what quantities. So my next question would be to Mr. Mathis, that how important do you think will be the buyer-supply synergy in the future, and how can it be addressed in the best possible manner?
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. This is one of the biggest underlying problems, of course, plaguing the industry. That so much stuff is made that in the end nobody's buying,
right,
or people are only buying at a big discount. So if you have to run so many discounts, then it's no wonder that prices are continuously under pressure. So if we are talking about sustainability, then I think, as Steve rightly said, it's also a holistic, it's a whole package, it's a holistic thing. And this is a very important part of it. You cannot have a sustainable business if the price pressure caused basically by enormous overproduction and an enormous mismatch between supply and demand is still there. Okay, how to tackle that? There are many things. There's one thing I would like to highlight, that I would like to add to the list of important things that we have to do in the coming years, and that is to make the industry also smarter. That is education. That is teaching the mid-management, teaching people how to deal. We're introducing. So that the supply chain with more knowledge, and this is on all sides of the order. So this is the buyers and this is the manufacturers. If we upgrade the knowledge that is there in the supply chain, only then can we make it more effective. Can we install the systems using the technology, making it smarter, making supply more in tune with demand. So I think we'll have to see a lot more courses, trainings in the industry, like I said, on all sides of the order, in order to make it more effective. And actually, we can say we should be more normal industry. You know, when you buy a piece of furniture or a car or anything, usually it will only go into production once you've decided what it's going to look like. And you know, the parking lots are usually not filled, well, sometimes, but not too often filled with millions of cars, you know, waiting to be there. And then people will say, "No, sorry, it's not $40,000. We'll sell it for $20,000 because we can't sell it otherwise." That is what is plaguing the industry and what we have to stop.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one final question that I like to put forth would be, we know there's a lot of conversation about sustainability and the fashion industry for a long time. So this is not a new conversation that I'm doing here. But I believe this is a great accelerator at this point of time. Ultimately, an increased attention from the industry towards sustainability will bode well both for brands and shoppers alike. And this is reflected in the growing interest in consumers who want to buy sustainable and vintage clothing and secondhand clothing. Of course, they want to be more eco-friendly than shopping seasonally. And it was also demonstrated in the protest in the London Fashion Week last September. So in view of the scale of impact of COVID on the apparel industry, how optimistic would be your views in terms of apparel consumption in the global market? Do you think that sustainability would continue to dominate the decisions of the millennials? And what resurrection measures could revamp the apparel industry to reach new heights in the next 5 years? I'd like Mr. Steve to begin first.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think I'm very optimistic about this. I think the opportunities that have been created by sustainability and the ability to accelerate those discussions, those sustainability conversations, because of COVID-19. I think somebody had said that, out of every crisis comes an opportunity, and if this is an opportunity that can unify us, then we can get to that end goal, or we can get to that desired goal a lot faster than perhaps we could have. I think it's going to require a lot of rethinking about how we view both production and consumption. If I'm producing garments that are going to last longer, I can perhaps charge more for them. Or if I'm producing garments that I don't have to constantly discount, as Matthias mentioned, then that reduces some of the pricing pressure. So I think if there's a way we can look at, the overproduction, overconsumption model that has driven a lot of the industry in the past, and build that into the sustainability conversation. So it's not only production that's sustainable, but it's consumption that's sustainable, and we're really reevaluating that basic model and implementing things. Then we have a chance of changing the footprint that we have. We have a chance of reevaluating the way in which our industry approaches selling to consumers, or industry approaches purchasing and making garments in the first place. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to really reset this conversation and no pun intended, put sustainability on a more sustainable path as we march into the next couple of years. Key to that will be collaboration with everyone. I saw in the question and answer section, someone was talking about creating, a regional hub between India and Bangladesh about producing textiles and fabrics. And right there, if you could develop that, then not only do you create, again, if it's done in a sustainable manner, and we are hearing Ms. An talking about the investments they're making in Vietnam to make sure that those new textile investments are done in a sustainable manner. So if you've got new collaboration and it's done in a sustainable way, then you've really reset the way in which the industry can approach traditional partners, as well as being able to sell to the consumers.
Right. Dr. Saktivel, what would be your take on the same?
See, the sustainability is a must nowadays, because especially for the young generation, they talk more about sustainability. This everybody thinks about the environment science, so it goes along with the natural. So the younger generation started thinking about sustainability, and also that whatever they buy, they want to be eco-friendly. So that will be more on clothing than any other product. That's what I believe in it. So we have to adopt this sustainability, and India has already started doing this eco-friendly garments, and it's from the cotton to finishing, we started producing that. So with the label, it sustainability label and eco-friendly label and natural, everything. So clothing will be easy or not easy. We are already tuned to the situation for sustainability, and the future is going to be all the aspect of science, technology for environment and eco-friendly and natural friendly. So this all will be there. So we will, as India, we will be ready for it, and we'll have a good future also for the sustainability garments.
Right. Dr. Rubana, as we heard Mr. Stephen and Dr. Saktivel talk about how sustainability is going to continue because millennials want to buy eco-friendly clothes. One twist I would like to add in here is, do you think the same consumption would continue in the next 1 to 2 years? We see a lot of the kind of fast fashion consumption that was there, that I would like to have every new cloth that Zara has produced or bought in its store, have that in my wardrobe. But now I would, kind of take a second look at that maybe I don't want to opt in for fast fashion because it is not eco-friendly. I would like to buy once in 6 months and probably a good eco-friendly t-shirt. Do you think that will harm the consumption side of apparel?
To answer your question carefully, I would just like to remind all of us that millennials of the globe actually have come together. They are not restricted by borders or by geographical location. My daughter would be equal in the same conversation as anyone sitting out there in the West. So their level of consciousness and commitment to buying products which are ethically sourced or made, they have the same considerations, they have the same moral parameters applying to the whole choice of consumption. I mean, it's not a surprising fact that, you know, COVID will wipe off around $297 billion worth of global apparel chain. We all know this. So there will be a drop in consumption, but will that drop be reflected in the losses of lives and livelihood, or can we somehow stop it from happening so that, you know, even if there's dip in consumption, let whatever is being consumed be consumed with the special consideration applied with regard to humanism. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that consumptions may drop, but prices must also go up. One of the worst things that we are noticing now is everyone's wanting already more for less. So you want the tag of sustainability in a product, yet you are not going to pay more because post-COVID, your scene, your landscape has changed. Your affordability has gone through a straight hit. So world is in a recession now. You can't expect apparel market to be booming. But how can we bring it back to at least a normal steerable course is going to be the biggest challenge. For this, we need to work more tightly together so that what we are saying in Asia should be transmitted to the whole world. And our appeal should be a global appeal. Different standards cannot be applicable anymore. And just on sustainability, let me also share that we have more than 110 factories which are LEED certified. And we have more than 25 which are platinum. And the biggest platinum certified factory is also in Bangladesh. So, you know, we've gone through that whole sustainability bit, and which was not prescribed. We did it on our own. True. On top of that, we have systems now for structural, electrical, and of course, everything in place. So with also the local capacity, which is fully developed, I think it's going to be worthwhile for us to turn to our regional partners, form very, very tight regional collaboration so that we can react quickly to the needs of our customers, and so that we can come back together with better strategies, which would be a win-win situation for us all without impacting lives or livelihood.
Right. I think that would be a great challenge also for the apparel industry. So kind of balance the consumption as well as, you know, becoming sustainable and offering more eco-friendly garments to the millennials. Mr. Mathis, what would be your views on the same?
Well, I echo Dr. Urbana's remark about, you know, the precarious balance that we're going to be in. You know, on the short term, we're going, as I said in the beginning, to have still less store visits, less travel, less money, more stocks. So that doesn't bode that well for price pressure, if we speak about that. But we have to find a way to get, as we have said, out of this crisis in a better way. And all of the vulnerabilities and things have been laid bare. The question is how to fix it and how to move forward. So all of the races to the bottom that we have, what are the ways we can block them? And it's going to have to be, I think, a collaboration of the industry and maybe even some governments. And I don't mean this necessarily only in terms of negative blocking legislation, but also enabling legislation. And some things have to be speeded up. I think that the LEED certification is a good example of a badge, of a tag that has really the ability to tell a story and to create a certain confidence in actions, sustainable actions by companies. But we don't have something like that yet to be put on a clothing product. There are developments taking place in Europe. You have product environmental footprint category rules that are being developed, where the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is active in. That would help. I think we see it in food. It's always good to look at other industries. You walk into a store, you would pay 3 times as much money for basically the same piece of chicken in any European supermarket that has introduced this scheme based on a 5-star type of certification of how this chicken was treated before it was killed. It's a strange example, but it works, you know, and those kind of things have to be developed to make the investments actually worth the investments, and to get the consumer also to do its bit.
Right. Now, since we are running a little short of time, I would just like to, you know, kind of summarize. I think it has been a very, very great discussion with all of you on board. COVID-19 has, of course, brought to surface the issues that have been long ignored by the industry. And we agree that 2020 has been a chaotic year to date for the business. But as Dr. Rubana clearly pointed out at the beginning, that chaos breeds opportunity. And it's time for industry to address them, for the business to respond in the longer term to the opportunity at hand. So we hope that COVID-19 is going to give us that opportunity to work for the welfare of the textile and apparel sector, both for the East and the West. And I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and all our viewers for this terrific discussion today. Before we end, we have few questions. So we'll be moving to the question and answer session. Since we are running a short of time, I'll just take on a few questions to be addressed. All right, so the first question is for Mr. Stephen Lamar. Regarding duty-free access of Bangladeshi apparel to USA, there's a high barrier. Although Bangladesh has made tremendous progress regarding labor rights, we understand you want us to do more before giving this privilege. But Bangladesh has an existential threat now. If it doesn't receive this support now and doesn't survive, then the scope for improvement is gone along with what has been achieved so far. Please share with us your thoughts on this.
So duty-free access to the US market for Bangladesh is something I've been working on probably for 2 decades now. I think it's a conversation that's been going on in one form or another, either as a Bangladesh-only concept, as something for least developed countries, as a element of the GSP program, which in the United States, Bangladesh currently is not part of. And you know, so there's a lot of ways to look at this. One of the first approaches I would encourage in Bangladesh to look at is, even though apparel and footwear are not currently part of the GSP program, travel goods are. So there's an immediate opportunity there if Bangladesh can come into compliance with what the US, and this is the US government, is looking for in the broad panoply of labor and worker rights, not ignoring the progress that's been made, but the GSP program is a very demanding program, and it wants sort of continuous progress in a lot of areas. So if Bangladesh were able to regain GSP status, it would immediately gain duty-free access for travel goods, and Bangladesh is a top supplier of travel goods to the United States. So there would be an immediate pickup there. I think over the longer term, you have to remember that that duties, tariffs are under the purview of our Congress. So it would require an act of Congress, and that would mean not only an administration that supports it, but getting a majority of both the House and the Senate to support that. And I can tell you that changing the duty-free calculation in the United States with respect to this industry is a very, very sensitive topic. One that a number of countries have been going through. Sometimes they prevail, sometimes they don't. And it is something that usually takes a very long time. So if you're serious about doing it, it would take a lot of effort to get that through. So thanks.
Right. Dr. Rubana, we have another question coming in from you. This says that after the post-pandemic is over, how is Bangladesh going to solve its transportation problems?
Transportation problems, I'm not clear. What transportation problems are we talking about? Are we talking about lead time, reducing lead time, or what is it?
I think this is talking about the inter-Bangladesh transportation, I think, we believe, to the ports.
I don't think it's an issue. I don't think our infrastructure is in question here. Mm-hmm. I think we've done considerable. We have had considerable progress there. I don't think that's an issue here at all. Rather, I'd like to take the opportunity and turn to Stephen for just a quick cross exchange, if I may, please, which is you yourself said that you yourself worked on Bangladesh's GSP issue for the last 3 years. Do you think that it's more to do with politics? Maybe more economic diplomacy is required? I mean, it shouldn't have taken that long. And at this point of time, if we could have perhaps something to do with the Bangladesh cotton, Bangladesh importing cotton, from US, if we could somehow find a mutually beneficial relationship there, and if we could be offered duty-free for products made with US cotton, that's probably a point of collaboration that we can hopefully, look at, if that's at all possible.
I would say everything in Washington is a function of politics, and economic diplomacy should underpin any successful campaign. So it's not only a question of getting the facts right and making sure that the people, the policymakers that we're talking to understand and agree with those facts, and you understand and agree with the end point of those facts, but that you build such a campaign around all of those factors, other allies, other stakeholders, and perhaps the U.S. cotton industry would be an ally on this. One of the initiatives that we've been pursuing for the last couple of years is, and this isn't a Bangladesh specific concept, but you brought it up, so I'll mention it, is to reduce the duties on products that are made using US content. Right now, if you import a product into the United States, you can reduce the value, the duty based on the foreign value added only if it's a component that you exported. So that US exported component doesn't pay, you don't pay tariffs on that when you re-import it. But if you're using US content, and so that content, the cotton, for example, and if the cotton is processed and turned into fabric, yarn and then fabric and then garments and then brought back into the United States, you don't get any credit for that US content that you use in Bangladesh or if it's in Vietnam or in India. And so one of the things we've been talking about is, can we create a program that would reduce that duty burden in the United States based on your ability to use US content going out? It seems like a great idea. A number of other countries do it. And it would also help reduce that crushing duty burden in the United States that, well, there's 3 valuable partners on the webinar here from India, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. You all pay very, very high tariffs into the United States. And so, ways that we can reduce those duty burdens is certainly something I think that helps reduce the overall cost structure that the industry faces.
Mr. Mathis, my next question would be to you, which we have got from one of the attendees, that will the virus result in protectionist trade policies across countries? How do you think countries will respond in terms of protectionist policies? Or I'll also extend this question to in terms of trade agreements.
It's a good question, because I was hoping there could be some sort of end remark that we could all have, where I could then say what I really would like to do, us all to do, panelists, but everybody involved in the industry, is to retain our faith in the global production system, and of course we'll make adjustments. But you can already hear voices where the need that is sometimes there to have also local production, or to ensure that there is no vulnerability and all kinds of strategic goods have to be imported. That need is clearly there, but it should not be overdone, because that will lead to unnecessary protectionism. So yes, there can be a reshuffling of sourcing partners according to need, but the global production system has proven its worth. You know, if we have a flexible system where for one particular product, it could be good to source closer from home, but for another product, in a different commercial setting, it could be very good to source it from China, from Vietnam, from Bangladesh, or from Pakistan. There should be no barrier to that. So I think it's very important in this period post-COVID to keep that in mind. Let's keep our faith in the global production system. I think if we all stick to that and keep cool heads in this and be champions of free but fair trade, I think we'll be doing fine.
All right. One final question to Dr. Saktivel. We have from one of the attendees that since we are talking about the reconstruction of the industry, what steps can the industry take to mitigate supply side green swan events, that is water pollution, drought, and desertification?
As per the water pollution control system in India is working very well. If you see it in Tirupur, we are the pioneer in bringing this zero technology. Right. Now, no factory is allowed to run the units without the zero technology. And it is all measured by the Pollution Control Board at Chennai itself. Like that, in each state, they have brought a lot of restrictions or a lot of conditions for processing factories. And I can boldly say in apparel export industry, we don't pollute at all now. Because of the zero technology, it comes into the force. We are very sure that whatever we do, it's a zero technology. You can see that this technology is developed by ourselves in India. Many countries from abroad, even Australia, even from Bangladesh, there are 3 times they came down to Tirupur and saw our technology, and we gave every technology to them, what we are doing and how we are doing it. So India is really taking care of this protection of the environment.
All right. Right. I would take a moment to thank our esteemed panelists and all our viewers for this discussion. For all the other questions that we have received from the attendees, we would be forwarding them to the panelists, and we would forward you the answers once we receive from them. We are very thankful, Mr. Stephen Lamar, Dr. Rubana Haq, Dr. Saktivel, Mr. Mathis, Ms. Anne, for taking out time today for having this discussion with us. We wish you all good health. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks Fiber to Fashion for arranging this and meeting all of us all over the world, I can say, from states, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and this is again technology. So thanks to the technology and thanks to the Fiber to Fashion. And my request now, both from Vietnam and Bangladesh, is that let us work together and build a Asian strong community of apparel exports. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great note to end on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dipti.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dipti.